All right, everyone. Hello. Meteorologist Carly Smith here. We're going to make sure the volume is working. Maybe.
All right, everyone.
There it is. All right. So this is your tropical update now at 10:18. So yeah, a lot is going on in the tropics. It is definitely worth watching, especially Beryl. Of course, we also had Tropical Storm Chris form overnight. You may not have been aware of, but we're going to dive right into all of the information. So thank you for joining this Facebook Live, YouTube Live update. We hope that it is beneficial to go through all of the information. And let me know your questions. That's what the comment section's for. Right now I'm checking Facebook, but I'm going to try to check YouTube more often. So watch there if that's your favorite platform. Tell your friends. Yeah, so we are going to talk about this tropical update. Of course, I am Carly Smith, and this is an important reminder. So right now we are about a week away from anything happening in the Gulf of Mexico with Hurricane Beryl. And with that being said, when you look at this bar graph right here, that is still a very poor, so here's 1 week, and then you go over this way, that is still a very poor forecast, just in general. There's not a lot of confidence. The way forecasting works is it's a math equation. It's a very long algorithmic differential equation, essentially. So there's a lot of factors to it. Fluid dynamics goes into weather modeling as well. And so if you just change 1 decimal point, that can dramatically change the forecast. If you round one number this way one time and you round the same number a different way the next time, it totally changes the whole forecast. And that's why accuracy is just so poor week, 2 weeks, 14 plus days out, right? But once we get within that 3 to 4 day range, especially, that's when it becomes reasonable. 5 days is a pretty okay forecast, and that's why that forecast cone goes out 5 days, is because there's a lot more confidence, and it does get wider on that 5th day, but there's a lot more confidence 5 days out versus 7 days out, and there's the most confidence 3 days out versus 5 or 7 days out. And then of course 24 hours is going to be a really accurate forecast, but that doesn't give you a lot of time to prepare. So we try to tell you what we know as early as we know it and make some calls on what we think is happening based on the education that we've had, and that's where all of this comes into play. So right now, this is our tropical overview. We do still have the tropical wave Invest 96L, the latest update from the National Hurricane Center. That system has a lower chance of developing, so it has a 60% chance. This morning it was at 70%. It's interacting with some dust, some shear. It's following in the wake of Beryl, which in theory should be lowering the water temperature a bit as it is that strong. But also it's a very small hurricane still at this point, which is one of the reasons why it's such a strong hurricane also. And then of course now we just have the remnants of Chris. So Chris popped up fast and went away fast as it made landfall this morning. So overnight you may have been sleeping. In fact, I think it was the 10 p.m. update is when Chris got a name. So Tropical Storm Chris formed in the Bay of Campeche. It made landfall this morning, and now it is just the remnants, and rain remains one of the biggest issues there for the eastern coast of Mexico. So yeah, that's what we're watching. Chris did boost our swell, so if you're at the beach yesterday or this morning, we do have higher swell, larger rip current risk as well, or a higher rip current risk because of those swells. But let's get right into it. Beryl is the one everyone wants to know about, I'm sure. So I'll see if anyone has any questions. Key point is be prepared 3 to 5 days. Yeah, it's not a lot of time to get ready, especially if it's a major hurricane. So the best advice I have is, we've been saying this is going to be an active hurricane season. So it's best to just be ready for anything, right? We saw what even just a tropical storm could do that hit miles away if all the ingredients set up, right? That created flooding on North Beach, Rockport. We got tornadoes. We got some heavy rainfall. We saw some of our country or farm to market roads flood from the rain, just in general from that system. We had some wind damage that created power lines to fall. So yeah, that was just our Alberto, right? Now we are talking really strong Category 4 Hurricane Beryl. A lot of factors are going to come into play. It should not be this strong as it continues to make its way across the Caribbean, but right now it is, and it is making landfall as we speak to some of these Caribbean islands. These are the Windward Islands, and I looked up some of the names, but these are a little bit of the lesser known smaller islands. So it's right in between St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and then Grenada. It's making landfall right in between those on the northern end of Grenada there. That is a really dangerous storm. The eyewall is so well defined. Something else fascinating that's happening right here is, so once we go through this loop, this is a 6-hour loop. So this morning at 4 a.m., it actually was weaker. It was a Category 3, but that's because it was going through an eyewall replacement cycle. And what that eyewall replacement cycle does is essentially, it's kind of like thunderstorms. You know how we kind of get some thunderstorms that pop up, then they weaken, then new thunderstorms form on essentially that outflow boundary. That's kind of what happens. There's thunderstorms that develop essentially, or convection that strengthens around the eyewall. That's the strongest part of the hurricane. That's where the heaviest rain is going to be. That's where the strongest wind is going to be. And so these storms essentially develop that eyewall. And as they kind of rain out, or those downbursts develop around the eyewall, it weakens the eyewall essentially as those storms kind of die out. And then the new storms develop a little bit further out from that original eyewall. And so essentially it makes the hurricane grow a little bit bigger. It makes that wind field, the wind radii, essentially the diameter of the strongest wind felt a little bit further out. And so the eyewall replacement cycle, it can be a very dangerous thing, especially if it happens right as it's making landfall. And that's essentially what happened this morning. That's something we're going to have to watch really closely for any storm that develops in this environment that we're in, with really hot sea surface temperatures and the conditions setting up into a neutral season. It is expected to be very active. So, okay, let's continue talking about Beryl. So 150 mile per hour winds, gusts 165. It is still a Category 4. It did weaken to Category 3. Then it went through that eyewall replacement. And now it is very dangerous as it is hitting these Caribbean islands. So, of course, obviously prayers for them, but also they're going to need some support for sure. Hopefully everyone is going to be safe and they're hunkered down in their safe spot, taking this storm on, because it is a powerful one. It is moving west-northwest at about 20 miles per hour. So this storm is booking it. It's moving pretty fast for a hurricane. And so here's the latest path. You can see it kind of wobble as it strengthens. That's probably when it did the rapid intensifying, is that little wobble right there. Crazy. Anyway, so here's the forecast cone. This is the latest update forecast cone. You do see it adds a little bit of a curve there now as we head into Saturday. So this is showing it still has signs of it weakening. Jamaica, the latest update, Jamaica is now under a hurricane watch. So if you know anybody with plans to travel to Jamaica this week, not the best time to be traveling to Jamaica. Also Cancun, Cozumel by Friday. Those areas across the Yucatan, not the best place to be either. Still could be a Category 1 hurricane as it approaches the Yucatan. When it interacts with the land of the Yucatan Peninsula, that's going to weaken it. But additionally, we see a weakening trend across the Caribbean, and I talked about this a lot during first edition, but that has to do with wind shear. Now, this is not the strongest wind shear. It's not going to have a huge impact on the storm, but it is enough where the signs are there that this is probably going to weaken a bit as it does approach the Yucatan Peninsula, right? Now, we're also looking for some of the steering winds, and you do see a northerly wind trying to set up, and also this high pressure break right here, this is a trough. So what I've been talking about is, let me see. I don't think I have the palette. Okay, this will work. So this is our jet stream, right? And this is a trough that has developed right here. This trough is essentially a cold front. So yeah, we are going to get a cold front that is making its way into kind of like North Texas. but it's not going to make it all the way through. But what the front is going to do is it's going to weaken these areas of high pressure and cause them to split and grow further apart. That is the window that opens up the chance for the storm to turn north as it does approach the Gulf of Mexico. And so essentially, the weaker there's a lot of factors that are going to be at play. It's not an easy forecast by any means. We definitely will have a lot more clarity by Wednesday. So Wednesday should have a lot more clarity as we're getting closer. By then, let me go back to this. So Wednesday, we'll know if it's weakened at all. Once it starts interacting with that wind shear, we'll know if there's a weakening trend by Wednesday. That would be a good sign. And additionally, by Wednesday, we'll have more data feeding into this storm, more model comparison to figure out if it's tracking in track with some of the model data or not. Lately, it has been, the forecast has been a little bit further north than the model data has had, but now it is starting to turn a little bit more north as it approaches those Caribbean islands. So a lot of factors go into the forecast, and I know this is probably feeling like way more information than maybe you came here for, but hopefully it is helpful in understanding what goes into a hurricane forecast and all of the above. So it's that wind shear in the Western Caribbean that is the #1 sign of it weakening. Additionally, we also are looking at the Saharan dust, right? So this storm actually is in like this beautiful pocket where a lack of Saharan dust right in between the two plumes. So our first plume is actually, there's like 3 plumes that have come off. So the first plume is here. It's hard to see with the new colors of our map. Yeah, we got new graphics, by the way. Meteorologist Kristen Wallen built a lot of these graphics. She's put in a lot of hard work on them. We're so excited to debut them today. We're focusing on the impact. So today, your weather impact is Saharan dust. Saharan dust really messing with some allergy-like symptoms likely. Asthma, if you suffer from asthma or lung disease or heart disease, you may be noticing it a bit more. It may be best to stay indoors. But allergy-like symptoms, hazy skies, that's that gray haze that you may have noticed if you're looking up at the sky. We could have a pretty vibrant sunset. The sunrise was a little too hazy and a little too cloudy, but the Saharan dust does suppress tropical activity. So you see that gap in the dust is where we see our Beryl. But look what happens Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The Saharan dust catches up with Beryl Friday into Saturday. And that's another reason it has a good chance of weakening and staying weaker as it does move into the Bay of Campeche. So this is Sunday. That's when it would be there. You kind of see the spin right there at the bottom of the screen. That spin, let me get well, there's not a pause point there. There's a pause point here. Then we can point to it. So this spin, like right here, that's where the forecast model data is showing it could wind up. You see all of the Saharan dust that it will be interacting with. So that should keep it weaker as it moves into the Bay of Campeche. So a couple of things to think about. The stronger the storm is, the more it's going to kind of move on the path it's already in. It kind of creates its own path when it is this strong. But as it weakens, as it interacts with the wind shear, that may cause it to try to move. So these storms, they kind of are smart. They want to travel down the path of least resistance. That's how a rip current forms also. So rip currents, they're trying to find the easiest way for water. The water is trying to find the easiest way back out into the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's how you get that rip current developing. It's the easiest path. There's usually some breaks in the sandbar that allow the water to just flow a lot easier versus in other places. Essentially hurricanes are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to find the path of least resistance. If it runs into shear, it weakens. So it tries to find an area with lack of shear. And what happens is when these high pressure systems split, that creates an area with a lack of shear. So while the steering winds are very dominantly east to west, while the high pressures are together over the United States, But once they split, that allows for the storm to try to turn north to avoid some of that wind shear. And additionally, this high pressure then creates a bit of a southeast flow across the Gulf of Mexico, which would work to bring up that moisture and possibly Beryl to the north if the high is strong enough. Now, if this high is not too strong, Beryl's not going to tap into that high pressure ridge, and it will keep going in the path that it's headed. If Beryl stays stronger, it will probably keep going west more so than turning north, because it already has developed like that path. But something else that could happen is as these high pressures split, we don't get a lot of steering winds at all. And if the winds aren't steering it to go anywhere, that's when it could just sit in the Gulf of Mexico. So, and some of the models are showing that that is a chance that it has to just kind of sit there and figure out what it wants to do. And we really don't want that to happen, because that would allow it to strengthen as shear leaves or dust moves into Texas. So essentially, we want it to keep moving, whether that's north or west. We want it to keep moving. We do not want it to just sit in the Bay of Campeche. But yeah, so the high pressure is going to split, and that's what makes this forecast so difficult, and essentially allows for the opportunity for it to turn north. If the high pressures do not split, if that cold front does not split up the high pressure, which I wish I could say the cold front moves through Texas, and that would help try to push the system back to the south as it moves through Texas, but it's not. It's going to stall essentially and then not move through Texas. So this is actually the newest model data from the European model, and it shows more of that moisture from Beryl making it into Texas by Monday, but not sold on that as of yet. Really through Sunday, still no obvious sign of what it's going to do. And so I wish I could say like, yes, it's definitely going to do this, but I'm just not. What I want you to take away from this is the high pressure split is what allows the north turn to be a possibility that we cannot ignore. And with that being said, our high pressure is still going to keep us pretty hot as we head into the holiday weekend. So if you're here for a 4th of July forecast, we're not going to have the tropics to worry about, but what we are going to worry about is the wind. We'll see a southeast wind 15 to 20 miles per hour, gusts 35 miles per hour. Temperatures will be likely in the upper 80s. Feels like temperatures, even as the sun is setting there at 8:29, will be 95 to 100 degrees. So that's not great at all. In your 7-day forecast, this is what we're looking at. Temperatures still staying in the 90s all week long. Feels like temperatures right around 110. This is not a watering week, and also this is a new 7-day forecast. By the way, if we start feeling like we are confident that Beryl will have an impact on the coastal bend, that's where the weather impact theme comes into play. So we could see Saturday, Sunday, possibly Monday of next week. If we are confident that we'll have an impact from Beryl, then we would highlight those days in red on our 7-day. So you're prepared for what's headed our way and when conditions will be their worst. And so that is a new thing that we have just to emphasize when the weather will be the most impactful. And so that's kind of the theme we're going with. We're not trying to scare anybody with the forecast or overhype it or over sensationalize it. But whenever the team, there's 4 of us, myself, meteorologist Kristen Wallem, meteorologist Faith Colbert, and of course Chief Meteorologist Alan Holt, when we are all in consensus and all in agreement that we'll have some sort of very impactful weather, so that whether that means tropical systems, heavy flooding rain, severe thunderstorms, extreme heat. And when we say extreme heat, it's hot here all the time. But when we say extreme heat, we're talking triple-digit heat. So last year we had 42 days where we were at or above 100. Typically, we see an average of about 4 days. So last year was very much an extreme heat kind of year. Heat index value 115 or higher. That's when we get the excessive heat warning. That's when it is abnormally hot for this region. And so that's when we would issue a weather impact alert or highlight that 7-day or a timeline for the impact that you're going to feel that is worse than other days. So yeah, that is the fresh new look and update that we've got going on. I'm going to go back to the satellite imagery of Beryl and look through the questions that have been asked. Hey Tambourine K, thanks for watching. So what's the update? She doesn't know yet, I missed it. I'm not sure when you asked that question, Marguerite. But yeah, the biggest update is that the break in the high pressure allows the storm to turn north. And so we're not confident whether or not it will do that. There's a lot of factors that go into play, but there is a chance, and it's worth talking about, and it's worth alerting you so that you can be prepared for any possible impact. The exact impact, how much rain, how strong our wind will be, the exact timing, where exactly it makes landfall, whether that's in Mexico or the United States, it's still too far out, unfortunately, to be confident in that forecast. Darlene said a great message here. Key point is be prepared. 3 to 5 days is not a lot of time to get ready for a major hurricane. Oh no, yeah, Barbados is, they're not in the worst part of the storm, but that doesn't matter sometimes. They're probably getting a decent amount of storm surge, very high winds. Where there is the tropical cyclone wind field. So here's our wind field that has, well now the wind field is past Barbados now, but still, tropical storm winds definitely moved through, possibly that hurricane strength wind. There likely were hurricane wind gusts, but it's going to continue to move away. So that's the good news. They should have some time to recover. Now, we do have the other invest that I haven't talked about a lot. You'll see that here. It shows signs of weakening quite a bit once it gets into the Caribbean. There will be a little bit of wind shear. It's following in the wake of Beryl. It is still showing signs of making it toward Cuba, somewhere between that Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba into next week. But that will be a system worth watching as well. But right now, the National Hurricane Center did at least lower the chance of development 10%. So we'll take what we can get. Yeah, this hurricane is actually pretty small, but the smaller tends to be more powerful. So right now, it's about 400 miles, give or take, anywhere between 400 and 450 miles wide. So it's not the biggest hurricane, but it is a very strong and very powerful hurricane. Here is our 5-day projected path, which does bring it into the Gulf of Mexico. So 4th of July, it will still be around Jamaica, passing Jamaica, and continuing to move toward the Yucatan. It'll be around the Yucatan Peninsula by Friday morning, and then it crosses over, likely weakening. Right now, the forecast cone has it as a tropical storm by Saturday, but of course that's 5 days out, and that can change a bit, especially the intensity. But past that 5 days out is just very hard to be confident in a forecast. That's why the forecast cone only goes 5 days out. So we're pretty confident that the storm does make it into the Gulf of Mexico. How far north it makes it is still the question mark, unfortunately, this morning. But we will have updates every morning. Chief Meteorologist Alan Holt will put in his thoughts on the evening show, and he'll have updates alive as he feels needed as well. Yeah, that cold front is what's going to push the highs apart, Darlene. Cancun would be dealing with the recovery, essentially. Swell will probably still be high. Tide would have to start going back out Saturday, but Saturday is when we're seeing it in the Gulf of Mexico. Friday is looking like the day of some sort of landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula, and so Friday likely would be the worst day for Cancun, Annette. But yeah, Friday, Thursday, 4th of July through Saturday, likely some of the worst days for Cancun. Cancun is a little bit further north, so it's not in the forecast cone, but that means it still could have tropical storm force winds, and additionally the swell could be at its highest up toward Cancun. It just kind of depends on the angle that the winds come in at. So you'll have to watch out for the tide forecast and that swell impact, and also some of the heaviest rainfall and the tornado threat could easily be Cancun as well. Then Cozumel tomorrow, heading back the 3rd to Galveston. So on the 3rd is Wednesday, this storm will be in Jamaica. And so tides might start getting a little high, waves might start getting a little high. Actually, let's look at the wave forecast. I'm going to edit this so I can change where this labels are. So here's, I don't know why it didn't pop up. Oh, that's why. Add cities. Pick on Earth. We want Cancun. We want Cozumel. There's Belize. Savannah, Miami, Tampico, Brownsville, Corpus, Houston, New Orleans. Okay, so the current swell you're seeing on your map, that is from Chris. So Tropical Storm Chris formed overnight and then quickly moved onshore south of Tampico, and our swell forecast will go down. Now we're looking at the swell. So Cancun and Cozumel start seeing waves that could be 2 to 4 feet. And then we start to get about 4 to 6. So yeah, some of the biggest waves and the highest storm surge risk is going to be for that area. But that would be Friday. So someone was asking about the 3rd. So Wednesday, Cancun and Cozumel should be fairly okay. It would be Thursday, but especially, so Thursday night is when things will escalate, and then Friday will be the worst day. And then Saturday, we'll see things starting to return to normal, but the swell still could be high in some of those vacation spots. And that could be problematic for flooding and things like that on Saturday. And then as we head into Monday and Tuesday of next week, we'll have to keep an eye on what that second invest is doing. We could see some higher tide and some storm surge and swell as well in Cancun and Cozumel Monday of next week. But that's a look at some of those vacation spots. going to look at a forecast model that gives percentages of the chance of a tropical storm or hurricane, but I can't remember the login for it right now. So Austin McCoy says, I just hope to get days off next week. Thanks, Sarah, for your comment. I appreciate that. Yes, if high pressure, which that's what we've been seeing. So Alberto moved into Mexico thanks to high pressure. We had impacts here, but there was a lot that was more of a fetch in between the low and the high. The low was Alberto, and then the high pressure that set up over the east, that created what is known as a long fetch of wind that pushed the water all the way across the Gulf of Mexico right into Texas. So that was one of the main reasons Alberto was stronger here in Texas than the last few tropical waves and now Tropical Storm Chris. We didn't see any big impacts from any of those because the high pressure was a little bit more centered over Texas, and that pushed the wind west instead of having it coming south, or technically it was an easterly wind. Instead of it being southeast across the Gulf of Mexico right into Corpus Christi and Rockport, the wind was more westerly, and it pushed the storm into Mexico without bringing us that swell or that fetch that was associated with Alberto. So overall, the high pressure has been pushing everything to Mexico. A lot of systems and a lot of rain has gone there right around Tampico and then south of there. Mudslides, a big issue into Mexico. That's one of the reasons too. We can get some of the dirty water coming up, not only from mixing from these storms and the swells they produce, but also from the mudslides that causes a lot of debris and all kinds of crazy things to come up, currents within the Gulf of Mexico and into our beaches. So mudslides are going to be possible into Mexico due to the rain from Tropical Storm Chris, which is now weakened. It's just the remnants, but it made landfall and is still producing some heavy rain in the area. So that was Chris, and then depending on what Beryl does once it gets there, it could keep going west and hit that same area once again. They're getting hit hard, but the high pressure is forecast to split. I'm pretty confident in that happening. So that is what opens the window to a possible turn to the north. I think, Kara, the only way it would regain strength is if there's not any steering wind. So once the high pressure splits, it can sometimes create this lull, which allows the storm to kind of sit and not move one way or another. And that, I think, is when we could see it strengthening. And so that's something we'll have to watch out for, is how much it slows down once the high pressure split. If it stays at the speed it's at, where it is moving, right now it's moving 20 miles an hour, I wouldn't be worried about it having enough time to re-strengthen in the Gulf of Mexico. But that splitting high pressure can sometimes cause it to slow down. And so that would be my main concern on any chance for it strengthening. Any forecasted rain for the end of the week? So yes and no. So if the storm stays south, we basically wind up with no rain at all. If it does head north, then yeah, we're going to get a lot of rain. So it's still too early to tell on the rainfall forecast, because basically if this hits Tampico, Mexico or south, we're going to see barely anything. But if it gets north of Tampico, that's when we have a better shot at some rain. So I haven't really analyzed the Chris in the Pacific scenario, but there is a chance of development in the Pacific. That might be a whole separate system. But there is like a medium chance of development there, southwestern Mexico. Let me see what the National Hurricane Center is saying about that. Broad area of low pressure is expected to form in a day or two, a few hundred miles off the coast of southern Mexico. some gradual development. So this might still be kind of from that Central American gyre. Or it Chris could cross over and kind of help it. But at this time, Chris is moving more west, and it would be north of where that area is. This is more so southern Mexico. It has a 40% chance of developing over the next 7 days. So yes, that is good news, Terry. It's a little too far out to worry, but it is worth watching, and that's what I really want to emphasize in this forecast. Thanks, Kara. All right, I think I've made it through all the questions, so I'm going to end this, and we'll dive into more details. And by Wednesday, we'll do a really long update, breaking everything down that I know. But thank you, everyone, for joining and watching. I'm meteorologist Carly Smith, and I am going to be signing off. Don't forget to check out our app. This is a great way to keep up to date with our tropical weather forecast, any news that comes out of this, anything that the city is doing to prepare for any possible tropical systems, any type of shelter setup. If we did get into that situation, that would all be on our app. So you can go to KIIITV.com/app, or if you're watching on some sort of platform where you can scan this QR code with your phone, you can do that as well. But for now, I'm meteorologist Carly Smith, and I thank you so much for watching.